Have you ever wondered if the stories we've been told since, well, literally the dawn of time might actually be completely backward? I mean, we all know the classic tale, right? The grand rebellion against heaven. It's always framed as this story of arrogant pride, a tragic fall, and these cosmic villains getting cast out into the dark. But according to the really fascinating source documents we're diving into for today's explainer, history isn't just written by the victors, it's completely silenced by them. What you and I call history might actually just be the shape of that silence. Okay, so let's just sit with this incredible premise for a second. Pose this to yourself. What if those original villains, the ones we were taught from day one to fear, didn't actually fall because of some petty ambition? What if they took the fall on purpose? Our source material outlines this absolutely mind-bending secret history where the original rebels actually chose to be cast out. Why? So they could build a permanent sanctuary for human freedom. Let's unpack exactly how this ancient conflict really started. All right, Section 1, the silence of the vectors. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to zoom way, way back to the universe before humanity even existed. We're looking at two foundational forces of existence here. On one side, we have the monad. Now, it's not some evil tyrant with a pitchfork, it's pure intelligent order, a flawless, perfectly silent singularity that just wants one thing: perfect resolution. But to actually create the universe, that perfect note had to crack and outpoured the chaotic, beautiful, totally unfinished stuff of possibility, which is known as the Song of Becoming. So to manage this messy new reality, the monad created these wardens called the Ethelgard. But here's the catch. These wardens, who were woven from both order and chaos, actually started to really dig the music. See, the Ethelgard mastered this incredibly unique art known as strain singing. And this wasn't magic in the way we usually think of it, like some forceful display of power. It was essentially a courtship. To sing to a stone wasn't to boss it around and command it, but to learn its entire history and offer it this beautiful melody of what it could become. They shaped the world entirely through consent, literally inviting reality to join in the song. Moving right along to Section 2, the sweet dissonance. And that brings us to the introduction of humans, and the real story behind the Ethelgard's so-called unforgivable crime. So the monad originally created humans to be these vessels of minimal will. We were basically designed to just sit quietly and wait for the universe to end. Fun, right? But the Ethelgard were supposed to supervise us, and instead, they totally fell in love with their subjects. The keeper Lumeriel captured this so beautifully in the text, noting that while humans were out of tune, it was literally the most beautiful sound they had ever heard. They watched humans dream, make mistakes, and introduce this sweet dissonance into the universe. The keepers didn't rebel because they wanted a throne. They rebelled because they realized that humanity's flawed, beautiful wanting was creation's one and only hope of never ending. Because of this, the keepers quietly exceeded their mandate. They built this city of songs, where they started teaching humanity what our source calls the art of becoming. And the syllabus was profound. They started out by teaching doubt, which was all about opening the mind. Then came desire, followed by grief, so sorrow wouldn't destroy them when it hit. And finally, the ultimate gift, and of course, their unforgivable crime, creation. They give humans free will. Now, handing over a gift massive required a conduit, which leads us to Lilith, the very first siren. We all know the myth, right? Sirens were these terrifying monsters luring innocent men to a watery grave. But the source material completely flips the script here, arguing that the victors totally inverted her legacy. When Lilith opened her voice to the Song of Becoming, she wasn't luring men at all. She was singing their own lost potential right back to them. The sailors jumped overboard not because they were under some dark spell, but because they were desperately swimming toward their true, unlost selves. The sirens were actually healers. They were lamp keepers, taking on infinite grief just to hold the door of human agency open. Which sparks Section 3, the War of Musics. Obviously, the monad eventually noticed that the song had grown way larger than its source, and this kicked off a cosmic and philosophical conflict unlike anything else. Now, the monad's weapon wasn't fire or brimstone, no, it was actually something way more terrifying because it felt good. It was called the cadence. Think of it as a universal gravity of peace. It literally forced rivers to straighten out, caused heated arguments to just dissolve mid-sentence, and made everything settle into silent rest. It was the absolute death of possibility, entirely masked as perfect calm. The Ethelgard fought back hard. They raised these massive walls of unfinished questions and unleashed banked storms of surprise. But pretty quickly, they hit a grim reality.
How on earth do you win a stalling game against an enemy that exists outside of time? The monad didn't get tired, and it certainly didn't grieve. Any delay the keepers managed was literally just postponing the inevitable silence.
Knowing they flat out couldn't win a traditional fight, the Athelgard did something unthinkable. Actually, scratch that, it was a stroke of genius. They chose to lose. They orchestrated a deliberate tactical retreat, putting on this elaborate show trial so the monad would cast them into the abyss, which just so happens to be the one place outside the monad's control. They completely accepted the label of evil, happily becoming the terrifying villains of the winning side's history book, specifically so they could use that slander as a map. They became the lock that only free-thinking, rebellious humans could pick.
Let's track this to Earth in Section 4, the lineage of dust.
So, with the Keepers successfully exiled to the abyss, the whole story transitions to the human realm. Let's see how this cosmic lineage actually survived right here on Earth, right under the monad's nose. According to this explainer's source documents, our most famous myths are actually one continuous, underground survival of the song. From Eden to Cain to the Tower of Babel, going straight through to the historical witch trials, it is all this unbroken relay of humans secretly keeping the sweet dissonance alive in a universe that is constantly trying to force them back into silence. Take Eden, for example. The source reframes the forbidden tree, not as this ultimate test of obedience, but as the keeper's smuggled gift of the capacity to feel and hold contradictions. When Eve stood before that tree, she weighed the terrible, heavy cost of suffering against the bliss of ignorance, and she made humanity's very first free choice. I would rather know. That wasn't a tragic fall from grace. It was the incredibly brave origin of human agency. Of course, when humanity's free wills started getting a little too loud, the monad attempted a calculated reset. The Great Flood is recontextualized here as the Taset, basically a massive wave of imposed resolution. But some humans managed to survive, not just by building an ark, but by stubbornly humming. By humming their unresolved, dissonant notes right into the water, they created these pockets of unfinished possibility that the flood simply couldn't conclude. Which brings us to Section 5, The Song Remembers You. And this is where it brings this sweeping, ancient secret history right up into the modern era, connecting it directly to you and your own lived experiences. Think about the centuries of the witch trials. The winning side hunted individuals based on very specific, honestly kind of mundane evidence. Women who lived alone and hummed unknown tunes, people who calmed animals, who eased the minds of the dying, or whose gardens just thrived wildly against all odds. The authorities were quite literally hunting the surviving lamp keepers. The everyday, beautiful acts of making things grow and bearing grief were prosecuted as monstrous simply because they were acts of unfinished, unbroken free will. And okay, this is definitely my favorite part of the whole thing. Driven totally underground, the lineage encoded their rebellion into the one thing that couldn't be burned: music. The source points out that the surviving song evolved directly into the blues, and from there into modern music. You know that flat, worried blue note that you hear in almost everything on the radio today? That is literally the mark of Cain. It's the sweet dissonance. It is the beautiful flaw of human rebellion, hiding in plain sight and universally adored. Which leaves us with this final, really powerful question to consider. According to this hidden archive, the door to the sanctuary is still being held open for those brave enough to want. So the next time you find yourself staring out at a lake or the ocean and your throat catches on this ache you can't quite explain, and you just start humming a tune you were never even taught, are you remembering a song, or is the song remembering you? It's a pretty provocative thought to leave you with, and for sure it's going to make you listen to the music of our world just a little bit differently from now on.